Good morning, everyone. What's up? Episode 33 of our breakfast talk here today. Excited to have you. I got my coffee with me. I hope you have yours. And we're going to hop right into this topic here. But today we're discussing athlete monitoring. Now, my previous work history, I worked at different places that involve lots of different types of monitoring health, wellness, and performance. So when we talk about athlete monitoring, I think a lot of people, if you're familiar with that topic, jump to conclusion of a couple areas. One, something like jump height, like how high do you jump? And that's not that it is a means of athlete monitoring, but that's just looking at one physical aspect. Another area people kind of jump to is things like GPS tracking. So they measure how far someone has ran, at what speed, and maybe their heart rate associated with it. And that's a way to get a load score on how much demand, physical work the body's performed. So again, another physical variable. And then there's another tracking that we probably are maybe somewhat familiar with, and that is in regards to just like an RPE or a questionnaire. You know, how difficult was today's session, and how hard do you think it was, and how long it was. So in those three examples, by the way, all three of those are kind of load monitoring examples in different ways. For example, the jump height is load monitoring in the sense you're measuring the output, your ability to jump high. And if you did something really demanding yesterday, well, the next day it would be not able to jump as high. So you'd be monitoring your loading capacity and your ability to recover based on that. Just the inference of how the jump height is performing. Secondly, on the GPS monitoring, you're actually trying to quantify the total amount of work. And then by using that total amount of work, you look at that amount of work relative to previous work done. Let's say you ran 3 miles today at a heart rate of 100 beats a minute, and then tomorrow you do 3 miles at 100 beats a minute, but the next day you run 10 miles at 150 beats a minute. Well, that's a lot of work. We can assume that's going to require a lot of recovery. And then the third one being that RPE, that actual perception of how difficult was it? You know, was it hard to actually perform that work? Again, all three of those are kind of means to work around the same attempt of understanding how much load you have performed and essentially are you recovered or not. Now, a flip side to that people often miss out on is the other side of that coin isn't necessarily how hard you have worked, but how well you have recovered. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If someone says, hey, I go and work out today. Let's give an example. I go and work out today, then tomorrow I come in and I'm pretty tired. You know, I can't work out today. I'm exhausted. Is it too hard of work, or is it not enough recovery? So it's an imbalance, right? So the balancing act, we put my coffee down, you can say, is it too much work? Is it too much or not enough recovery? And in doing that, we can assess our total workload that we're doing. Like I just mentioned, maybe like a jump height, again, inferential, nonetheless, maybe like a load monitoring of a GPS, maybe the RPE. But then we can also assess our own actual inputs for recovery. And these are stones often unturned. Things like wearables, where we measure your sleep quality and quantity, not just how much sleep are you getting, but is it good sleep? How much REM, how much deep? Are you waking up multiple times in the middle of the night? So the quality of the sleep. You can also look at nutritional factors. Are you getting enough hydration, enough water obviously, but enough food, replenishing yourself relative to the work being done? And then maybe a psychological stress score as well, because stress is stress to an extent, where if we have lots of psychological stress in our life, it's going to impact our ability to recover. So in that sense, well, if we have reduced psychological stress, ability to relax and be mindful, then we could potentially have better recovery. So when it comes to athlete monitoring, and the reason why I bring this up, we have to look at it from both sides of the coin. Because if you're just doing the recovery side, you're missing the load. If you're missing the loading, just doing the loading side, you're missing the recovery. It's a balance between the two variables, work and recover. And an imbalance is what causes the issue. And so when we think about our training, we cannot just look at it from strictly a load capacity standpoint. What we want to look at and think about it in terms is our ability to handle a load, an internal load. And that's the key word to use. We use all these external variables, like how much weight did you lift, and how far did you run, or how fast did you run. Those are all external work variables. Even measuring like your sleep is an external variable, but it's an attempt. All these external outputs are attempts to look at the internal system that is your body and predict how it's going to change. Because one person who is who does the same workout as the next might have a very different internal response inside their physiology, which dictates a very different recovery process. And all these variables we're collecting is an attempt to reflect the internal processes. Now that's very important because that changes our mindset a little bit more. Because when you change the mindset from external work being one-to-one related to internal work, instead external work, the amount of work you do, is merely an inference into what might be happening internally, you can start to understand some atypical patterns better. For example, someone might go into a recovery phase or a tapering phase. You might pull off a bunch of work. You say, okay, look, we're going to lighten up the work. We're going to do less training. But we don't realize that they themselves might be getting stressed out, excited, nervous for the upcoming event. So even though you pulled off 10% of the training, the fact that they're excited and nervous means that there is a 10% or 15 or 20% higher level of stress just at baseline. And so the total magnitude of stress is actually still more than it would be if if we didn't pull off training. So we got pulled off maybe a little bit more, pull off like 20%. So then the total of stress, if they had 15% extra stress from just being nervous, and you pulled off 20% of training stress, well, then there's a 5% reduction in total stress on the body. And so again, it helps you kind of begin to look at and think about these variables from different angles as to why and why not we're making progress. And we can't just think about progress in isolation to the amount of work we do in the weight room, because if that's all it was, then training would be very easy, it'd be very simple. We would just work harder to get better, but that's not really the case. We want to adapt better. We want to train optimally. So we want to track how we feel, what the loading is externally, and internally, are we actually recovering? Are we making the progress that we'd like to see? The gains, actually. And so even as I mentioned in the beginning, you have those three variables, kind of the GPS tracking, the RPE, and the jump height. If you use those appropriately, you can kind of use those to balance and bounce back off each other. And they kind of get a synergistic power to understanding internal and external capacity to an extent, right? You say, well, I ran this far. It was this hard to me, relatively speaking, rate of perceived exertion, and my jump height did this and that. Well, we can kind of have an inference, a prediction as to what's going on. Again, it's never going to be perfect as to what's going on internally, but it can give us a better understanding. Metrics like HRV and metrics like sleep might be a little better to give us some better understanding, and they're, especially that HRV and sleep, are very important when we start to hit a situation where we're not making the gains that we think we were supposed to be making, because it does give us a better internal reflection. We'll talk about that another day. HRV and what it means. It's heart rate variability. It's a reflection of the sympathetic nervous system and some of the presence it has, or the tone it has, relative to the stressor or stressors applied to the body. It's an alarm state. And again, we'll dive into that another day. Maybe that'll be the next video. We'll be talking about HRV because it's a fun topic. So recovery is important. Training is important. The interaction of the two is very important. So athlete monitoring, your own monitoring, health, wellness, and performance can all be utilized to help make your training better. So I'm going to drink my coffee. It's getting cold. My thumb just went in it. I apologize for that. As always, take care. If you guys like these videos, feel free to subscribe, comment, and share them.